When Adolf Eichmann walked to the gallows, the whole world was watching. If you haven't read the book, The House on Garibaldi Street, of his arrest, I encourage you to read it. It's fascinating. But a press reporter, Hannah Arendt, a philosopher, wrote The Last Scene. Her book is fascinating. It's called The Banality of Evil, the Trivializing of Evil. She ends the book with these words. Listen, he's played the atheist game to the core. Listen to the words he uses at the end. Adolf Eichmann went to the gallows with great dignity. He had asked for a bottle of red wine and had drunk half of it. He refused the help of the Protestant minister, the Reverend William Hull, who offered to read the Bible with him. The voice would have come again, you see, the voice of truth. He had only 2 more hours to live, and therefore, quote, he said, I've no time to waste. He walked the 50 yards from his cell to the execution chamber, calm and erect, with his hands bound behind him. When the guards tied his ankles and knees, he asked them to loosen the bonds so that he could stand straight. I don't need that, he said, when the black hood was offered to him. He was in complete command of himself. Nay, he was more. He was completely himself. Nothing could have demonstrated this more convincingly than the grotesque silliness of his last words. He began by stating emphatically that he was a Gottgläubiger, to express in common Nazi fashion that he was no Christian and did not believe in life after death. He then proceeded, quote, after a short while, gentlemen, we shall all meet again. Such is the fate of all men. Long live Germany, long live Argentina, long live Austria. I shall not forget them, end of quote. In the face of death, he found the cliche used in funeral oratory. Under the gallows, his memory played him the last trick. He was elated, and he forgot that this was his own funeral. It was as though in those last minutes, he was summing up the lesson that this long course in human wickedness has taught us. The lesson, please listen, this is a secular thinker, the lesson of the fearsome word and thought-defying banality of evil. It defied language. It defied thought. What was he talking about? Absolute nonsense. And I say to you, my dear friend, that as words reflect reality, I think it is so important we understand what wickedness is all about. I went through a very difficult session with a friend. I shall leave that person unnamed because I even hesitated to mention it, but let me do it. A man sat in our office. Dan and I were there. He'd gone wrong. He'd gone very wrong in life. He cheated an awful lot of people. A lot of money was involved. A lot of lies by his own mouth. But then he turned around and said, but I really didn't mean it for evil, you know. I didn't mean it wrong. If I'd meant it for wrong, would I put my children in the way of this sort of thing if I really believed that I was doing wrong? You know, that sounds so good, doesn't it? But I looked at him and said, my dear friend, I said, there's a difference between serving God and playing God. When you believe the first lie, that you could cheat all these people and lie, you also believe the lie, in effect, that your children won't get caught in this. See, it builds a web. It builds a web. And I stand before you pleading with you that words are very important. God defined reality. Watch the language of the world changing right now. And what has happened is we took the devil out of the scene. We took sin out of the scene. What's happened to us is we've believed a lie that we are big enough to be without God and control everything right down here. The mystery of iniquity. But secondly is what I call the marvel of worship, the marvel of humanity's worship. First is the mystery of human wickedness. Second is the marvel of humanity's worship. There is a longing within each one of our hearts. There is a longing. Listen to what D.H. Lawrence said. We want to delude ourselves that of the problem of our emptiness, love is at the root. I want to say to you, it isn't. Love is only the branches. The root goes beyond love. A naked kind of isolation. An isolated me that does not meet and mingle and never can. It is true what I say. There is a beyond in you and a beyond in me which goes further than love, beyond the scope of stars, just as some stars are beyond the scope of our vision. So our own search goes on beyond the scope of love, and at least I think that it is at the root going beyond love itself. Lawrence, in one of the few occasions that he writes, was very absolutely right here. It is not just love. I have a family that I love dearly. I'd cling to them past anything else that I possess. But there's a point at which you look for something more. You may be completely in love with another human being who fulfills the deepest desires of your heart, except one desire that the human being cannot fulfill. There's always that haunting sense of emptiness that mankind cannot fill. Who put this there? This is an existential struggle. This is why I think the arts will always be so powerful in our existence, because the arts give us the privilege, as it were, of creating another reality, but it just assumes it's another reality. What it is the reality in here. Well, the psalmist says, as the deer pants for the streams of water, so my soul pants after you. How lovely are your dwelling places, O God. My soul longeth, yea, fainteth for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Yea, the swallow has made herself a house, and a sparrow a nesting place, where she may lay her young. A place near your altar, a place near your altar, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Better a day in your presence than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. That hunger that even the blatant secularist has, he cannot explain. It conflicts existentially, and God fills that. That's why the woman at the well, do we worship here? Do we worship there? And he says, look, you're an empty woman. You've had 5 husbands. The man you're living with is not your own. I can give you a drink of water so that you'll never thirst again. They that worship must worship me in spirit and in truth. The Father seeketh such to worship him. See, there is not only this contradiction of wickedness with which we don't know how to explain. Secular people do not know how to explain this hunger within the human heart. They struggle with it. Those of you who were with me at the Harvard Forum, the second night when we finished, that Ames courtroom is a beautiful auditorium. The students were lined up in that semicircle. I still remember some of their faces as I was standing there. I was so weary from having lectured for an hour. It's intense. And yet for about 2 hours, you're answering questions. Fresh, young-looking scholars, brilliant scholars, holding my hand with both of theirs, some of them, saying, I really need an answer for this. When I was speaking in Toronto this year at Ontario Bible College doing a lectureship, on the second night, a young Bulgarian man came forward. He said, I heard you Sunday night at the People's Church. He said, I don't go to church, but somebody said there was a person who dealt with philosophical issues, so I came. He said, I'm an atheist. Mrs. Zacharias, I don't know what it is about what you're saying, but it strikes me deep inside here as something we all need to hear. I don't know what it is. Please keep doing what you're doing. And if you'd be willing to come to Bulgaria, I will host your meetings. And there's Bible college students standing out there looking in stunned silence at this law student from York University who's telling me to please keep doing whatever I'm doing. He doesn't know what it is, but it sounds right. You know what it is? He's probably saying there's something in here that says only God is big enough to fill this. Let me tell you a beautiful story that I've included in the book I've just written. And every time I thought of it and I wrote it, it just moved me to tears. Only God is big enough to give us such beautiful little stories. I think it was a Billy Graham teammate when I heard this story. I could be wrong, but I know it's a true story. Many years ago during the Cold War, one of their members was in Romania. And he was walking sort of huddled up, bundled up with his coat tightly clinging to him. It was a blistery day. But one Romanian amidst the many, one of them was walking by, hands in his pockets and whistling a tune. He wondered how this fellow could whistle in that cold. And then he paused and listened. He was whistling a hymn. The great physician now is here, the sympathizing Jesus. He said, I ran after him. And I looked at him and I said, do you know Christ? And the fellow shrugged his shoulders. He couldn't talk English. He didn't know what to do. And then he decided to whistle the hymn. The fellow's eyes just lit up. His face just beamed. He whistled the melody with him. They hugged one another, pointed towards the heavens, embraced and touched their hearts and walked on the way. 2 worlds were bridged because at this point, even a tune resounded the words of what they knew was real deep in their hearts, the mystery of worship. The world doesn't know how to deal with this. If that's what a stranger can do for you, just the lines of a hymn, and you wrap your arms around a total stranger, what does it do when you learn to worship God himself, who brings the divergent areas of your lives and makes it into a composite whole? It is God and the worship of the living God who brings meaning into your life. Outside of it, all these fanciful things we live for just end up ultimately being burned into rubble. The most precious thing I still experience in my life are the moments where I can walk away and just know my heart has been touched because a bridge has been created. So first is the mystery of evil. Existentially, the secularist doesn't know what to do with it. Secondly is the marvel of worship. Thirdly and quickly, the mastery of the human will. That's where the collision really takes place. In Newsweek magazine, there's an article on Ted Turner. The man has to be a genius. He has to be immensely capable. For a man to have gained so many successes one after another, he has to be farsighted. But it is interesting what this article says. He says in this article, I don't want any money anymore. He says what Turner wants is more power. He says, I want to know what being really big is like. The article ends with says, nothing is going to be big enough for Ted Turner. I couldn't help but think of what happened to Alexander the Great. Do you know how when he died? He was in Babylon, and when his wife was soundly asleep, he was so ill, I think he was in his 20s, crawled out of the bed and crawled over to a nearby river. He was hoping to drown himself and didn't know enough that his body could sooner or later be spotted, but he hoped if he would drown and disappear, they would all think he really was a god. But as one Greek philosopher says, the problem with Alexander was he was his own worst rival. Nothing would satisfy him. Nothing would satisfy Turner with power. Nothing ultimately will satisfy you or me. This is where our worlds collide. They collide with the mastery of our wills. And I challenge you, brethren, take that will and turn it over to him.
Welcome back to Just Thinking. Over the last few days, Ravi Zacharias looked at the reality of evil and why it happens. Evil violates purpose, which is why finding and keeping our purpose for life is so critical. Our human wills are a key component when it comes to life, worship, and following the blueprint God established for us. Ravi shares why the mastery of the human will is so important in the conclusion of his message, The Mystery of Evil and the Miracle of Life.
Can I give a personal illustration here? I'll be very careful. Always like to be careful with my family so that I don't say anything to you about them that they don't want me to say to you. So let me just say it as quickly as I can, because one of the reasons I think God puts children into our lives, which we forget, is to teach us. We think we're here to teach them. And I don't mean that in any trivial sense. My kids have taught me more than I think I will ever teach them. My little girl, Naomi, taught me a big lesson a month ago. A lesson that I think I needed to learn long before this. She never knew she taught it until I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go and tell her she taught it to me. She was going through a personal struggle where she was hurting a lot, very deeply. And I don't know what it is about us men. We do have some strange beliefs and simplistic solutions to very deep-seated emotional. We think 2 lines and it's so, I don't know what it is about us. We're really quite foolish in that. Naomi is going through this deep struggle, and I sat down one night and this is the way you solve it, A, B, C, D, gave all the simple answers. I woke up in the middle of the night and knew I was dead wrong because I knew what I was doing. I was fearing that my power of direction was not going to be taken in this instance, that I was going to lose that power over my child's life. I mean that very sincerely, very ashamedly. Margie dealt with it. Do you know how she dealt with it? She cradled Naomi in her arms while Naomi cried her heart out. Margie never said a word, just sang some of the hymns of faith to her. Where did the power come from? From me, it was coming from myself. I was losing something I didn't want to lose. From her, it came from the power of a relationship that could tie into a greater truth than just us. I got up at 3 in the morning and I went by her bedside and I wept and I asked her forgiveness. This is where our worlds collide. They collide with the mastery of our wills. And I challenge you, brethren, take that will and turn it over to him. The world resists him. even though they cannot explain reality, it's the power that is so great within them. And I just say to you, the disciples fought over it. Can you imagine? Jesus had just been transfigured. Then he came down and cast out a demon from a little boy. And these boys are arguing who's going to be greatest in the kingdom. The very passage, Mark 9. He's just been transfigured. What glory! He's just cast out a demon that they couldn't. They said, how did you do this? He said, this kind cometh not out except by fasting and praying. Their debate is who's going to be greatest in the kingdom. And nobody wanted to admit it. If you really want to be understanding of what mastery is, turn the life over to the Grand Master himself. The mystery of human evil, the world cannot cohere with its argument there. The marvel of humanity's worship, the mastery of the human will, and finally, the miracle of human existence. And I tie this together. Listen very carefully here, please, because the application is going to be important. Alan Isaacs, the atheist, in his book, The Survival of God in a Scientific Age. Isaacs is an atheist. Listen to what he says. It is one thing for the Salvation Army to re-equip with electric guitars, but it is quite another thing for religion to deal effectively with the cynicism of young minds, which have been nurtured in a century dominated by science. The greatest gift of this century to our posterity is this, that we have released our children from the fear of the supernatural. The concept of God is still available for those who need it, but those who do not have no longer to be ashamed or afraid. So what place, he asks, if religion should have any in our culture? The greatest gift of this century to our posterity is that we have released our children from the fear of the supernatural. The atheist says that. How do we deal with this whole thing? I say to you that the fact of the matter is that in human existence itself, we do one simple thing that can so easily get us sidetracked. Please listen to me now. We as Christians overestimate the value of a miracle. Most skeptics underestimate the value of a miracle. Why is it in the times of Moses there were so many miracles and so many still didn't believe? Why in the time of Elijah, so many miracles, so many still didn't believe? In the time of Jesus' birth, so many miracles, still so many didn't believe. Judas walks with Jesus for all those years and sees miracle after miracle, and still he didn't believe. Elisha's servant watches 16 miracles performed one after another, and he still didn't believe. You see, if the heart is determined to follow its own way, a miracle alone is not going to satisfy. And yet, the miracle that the world is looking for, I believe, is not the miracle from out there, but in the loneliness of a breakdown in the existential experience, where wickedness cannot be explained, where the hunger for worship keeps going further and seeking some answer, where the will seems to constantly be colliding with other wills. What the world is looking for is not so much just an answer of origins. The world is looking for something that'll change that enslavement within. And ladies and gentlemen, because existentially their lives are broken, and existentially, Christ brings such restoration. He brings that subjective experience because objectively his word is true. And that is the sequence it must always be. The truth is objectively true, appropriated subjectively. If it's only a subjective truth with no objective corroboration, there's no way of proving it true or false. This is true on the inside because it is true on the outside. And God can bring a miracle in your life and mine. And I say this to you, all over the globe I go, and I see transformed lives. I see people who sought for that miracle and found it. And if this whole idea of evil, the search for worship, the conflict of wills, and the search for a miracle in human existence continues, how then can the church respond? I have two applications, an illustration, and it won't be long. Number one, please follow me. I think this is very pivotal. You don't see these things written too many places, but the more you pursue the scriptures, you see why it is so. When Adam and Eve sinned, they were expelled from the garden. There was an eastward move. But the door from the east was shut with the angelic beings guarding it. They were kicked out eastward. When Cain killed his brother, Abel, he went into the land of Nod, eastward. When the men were building the Tower of Babel, they were moving east towards Shinar. When Lot and Abraham stood and surveyed the topography before them, and Abraham said, you make the first choice where you want to go. The Bible says he chose and moved towards the east, the cities of men. Abraham was the first one to move west. And when he turned and moved west, you know what the Lord said to him? I'll give you everything. All that is north, all that is south, all that is east, all that is west. Are you as a Christian, while the world goes east, are you willing to go west? Are you willing to take that stand that is completely and radically different to anything else the world would consider plausible? Will the church be willing to move west while the rest of the world is moving east? And I mean that in the figurative sense, be in contradistinction, in clear, stark contrast to what the world lives by. And lastly, I say this, is it possible, and I thought deeply, so you have to bear with me, please don't condemn me for this. I thought of this long and hard, very long and hard, and if I'm mistaken, forgive me. But you know, if the world wants to believe a noble lie, and we believe that this is the truth, and this is the word that defines reality, there is only one question left for you and me to answer in this apologetic conflict. Why do we believe this to be true? When was the last time you walked into a church and heard a sermon on why the Bible is true? This is our problem. Our young people want to believe this, but they are not getting answers on why this is true. We tell people they are framing their lives by a lie. We have followed the truth, and the biggest question in our churches today is, why is this the truth? Why have you traded your life for what Genesis 1-12 says here and the rest of it? If this is true, then we better tell our young people why it is true, because they can't go into their colleges and universities and just say the Bible says. We tell them they are living by a lie, and we tell them we are living by the truth, and they want to know who says so. The biggest failure we are doing as Christian leaders today to our young people is we have not taught them how to defend this. That is the failure of the apologetic movement over the last 20, 30 years. We've not told them why this is true. You know what Satan's done? He's got us to move our forces, fighting battles in certain areas, and we've left this unguarded. Battling out many social issues as good as they are, but nobody knows how to defend this anymore. If we want to call this world's lie a lie, we're going to have to demonstrate it with the truth and defend the truth, because the mystery of iniquity is there. The marvel and the hunger of worship is there. The miracle of existence itself and the mastery of the will. In this existential struggle, God's word is true. Let us do this generation a favor by defending this, because the word of God conforms to reality, and our lives must conform to reality too.
You've been listening to a message from Ravi Zacharias titled The Mystery of Evil and the Miracle of Life. To purchase a copy of this broadcast, call us at 1-800-448-6766 and request the title by name. Or you can order online at rzim.org and rzim.ca if you're listening in Canada. Have you ever wondered how we could better train today's pastoral students in the subject of theology? If so, be sure to listen to tomorrow's Q&A session on Just Thinking.
Sam Harris wrote The End of Faith, a scathing attack on faith in general and Christianity in particular.
I responded to Sam Harris in a book called The End of Reason. It's a slender volume with some sound arguments and analyses. You will be blessed and find it a means of talking to others on how best the Christian faith is rationally credible and existentially relevant.
The End of Reason, available online at rzim.org.
Would you commit to pray for our ministry as we strive to encourage and equip Christians to share the gospel with gentleness and respect? If you'd like to donate to our efforts, you can call us at 1-800-448-6766, or you can donate online at rzim.org and rzim.ca if you're listening in Canada. Have these radio broadcasts impacted your life in some way? If so, we'd love to hear your story or any questions, comments, or prayer requests you'd like to share. You can email us at radio@rzim.org, and when you contact us, be sure to let us know which radio station you're listening to. Just Thinking is a listener-supported radio ministry and is furnished by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.